Good afternoon, and welcome to the special edition of the AICPA Town Hall Series. We've been conducting these for the past 3 months. We greatly appreciate being with you every week. Glad we're with you this week. We always learn a lot. You ask great questions, we have great dialogue, and I know that will happen today as well. So let's get right into it. Let me just cover a couple of housekeeping items. I think most of you are familiar with our webinar platform. 3 key capabilities related to the bottom toolbar. You can download the materials, you can ask questions, and you can get your CPE certificate at the end. But don't worry, if you don't get your CPE certificate, you'll receive an email about that. You can also resize these windows, so make the slides larger, and also adjust your volume. Increase the volume if you need to, and also if you're having issues with the volume, it's choppy, just make sure other windows are closed on your PC so you can maximize your streaming capabilities. So the presenters today are myself, Eric Auskerson. I'm the President and CEO of CPA.com, the AICPA's business and technology arm. We've got Mark Koziel with us, who's been with us every week and leads the firm services section. We've got 2 practitioners with us this week. We've got Bill Paroli, who is actually now the vice chair of the AICPA, and he's a partner at DeSanto Priest, a mid-sized New England firm, and look forward to his comments later on in today's session. And we also have Jeff Porter with us, a partner at Porter & Associates, a small firm in West Virginia. And Jeff's been very active over the years. He was chair of the Tax Executive Committee, and he's had a number of leadership roles. And we have Lisa Simpson, and you all know that her team has been working tirelessly building all of the resources related to the PPP program, and she'll be providing some of the latest information. So here's our agenda. We're going to start off just with what we've been doing every week, with a quick recap of what we've recently covered, and we're also going to share with you our top 12 questions and where they stand. We're then going to just have a broad update on what's happening with the policymakers and the overall relief programs, and then we'll dive in to some recent guidance, and then we're going to end with the practitioners' discussion in the open forum. So first off, that's the symbol of the download button for today's materials. You can download our frequently asked questions related to the PPP program. We also have a summary document related to the PPP Flexibility Act. And here's the highlights of the last 3 town halls. Last week, we went into detail about the recent IFRs on loan forgiveness. On the June 18th town hall, we covered the new forgiveness application in easy form. And then on the June 11th town hall, we did a little bit of a deep dive into EIDL and the Main Street lending programs. So here are the top 12 questions. You see that we've got answers. We've got answers to the first 8. And what we've done here is we've highlighted which FAQ number they are in that downloadable material document. And then we've got 4 questions that we've asked the Treasury, and we've been told that these are going to be coming out with the upcoming FAQs. And just regarding the upcoming FAQs, yes, they're not out yet. We just recently received an update, and we are expecting them to come out tomorrow, Thursday the 2nd, or Friday the 3rd. They've liked Fridays in the past, but there's a good chance they'll come out tomorrow. So Lisa, anything you just want to comment on related to these top 12 questions before we move on?
Well, I'll actually throw in a couple of points. We've already gotten a question about how to account for PPP loans in our Q&A. So you'll see a link to a great J-based summary of how to do the accounting for loans, and then that'll give you a link to the more detailed technical Q&A. So look for the guidance in those links. And one of the top questions that I don't have on the slide because we'll talk about it a little later, but just to beat some of you to the punch, is applying for forgiveness early. So teaser, we'll get to that one soon.
Thanks, Lisa. So let's just now cover a couple of high-level slides. We shared this slide last week, just looking back in the past quarter, March, April, and June, a time like none other for the profession. And so many of you have said, in the last 100 days, you've built 10 years of relationships, a very defining time as you helped your clients go through the business shutdown process, navigate the application process related to business relief, focusing now on some reopening activities and the forgiveness. And as we look forward, the next 100 days, is going to be just as critical. Bill Paroli, I know this is something that you've reflected on at your firm, so maybe share some of your insights on how you've experienced these past 100 days.
Sure, Eric, thanks. I don't think in my 40-plus year career that I have dealt with as many clients at the same time in that key trusted advisor role. It's really been incredible to connect with clients at that level. But even more important than that, and more eye-opening for us here as a firm, is our younger partners and some of our senior staff have come into meetings and said, I've never felt so connected to my clients before. They're now starting to field these phone calls directly from the clients. So it's really watching some of our younger partners morph into that role as a trusted advisor.
Thanks, Bill. And as we're going to be talking about PPP2, the next phase of the PPP program, not the extension, the next phase. And there's going to be more business relief. There's going to be more to navigate with your clients. So I think this is great, what has happened over the past 100 days, and some of the younger professionals can build upon it, but there's still an opportunity. There's still an opportunity for many to seize upon what this moment means. So where are we right now with our stakeholders? What we can tell you is that we're actually in a very critical stage. It feels in some ways like early April. In early April, we were communicating with the government officials and the lending community and the payroll community about the application process. And now our dialogue with them has greatly increased related to this forgiveness process and the start of the submittal of these forgiveness applications, which is still not going to happen for a couple of weeks. But we're talking to them about a common approach, what documents are required, how is this going to be done, and I'm highlighting a slide that we showed, a month or so ago about our AICPA-Led coalition. We're having some regular discussions with the leading payroll providers like Paychex, ADP, Intuit, and Gusto, and many others that are listed on this slide. We have a call with them later today, just trying to understand where they stand with their payroll compliance forgiveness reports. And later on today, we'll be talking about how we see all of this integrating into an online application for the 3058 and 3058 easy forms. So it's just something that we're gonna be working hard at over the next couple of weeks to really make sure we're all collaborating and working as best as possible. So these are just I covered most of these activities. We actually had another call with Treasury this week. That's where we got the status on the FAQs, and they are working to clarify those open questions with the FAQs. It's going to be slightly less than 30. It'll be between 25 and 30 FAQs coming out, and we're also working on advancing our forgiveness calculator into a forgiveness tool and trying to get a common approach with the document set that's going to be required for the forgiveness applications. So here's the latest SBA numbers. I'm sure many of you have seen these. These came out on June 27th. We do know over the last 48 hours there was a final flurry when everybody thought that June 30th was going to be the deadline. June 30th still could be the deadline. We'll talk about the extension bill in a second. But this is where it's at. There's obviously a lot of money still available, and we will see what happens now with the next phase. So what's been going on in the media? A couple of big things. One, that big surprise from last night related to the Senate passing the extension of the small business loan program. Right now, the House is actively discussing if they're going to do a unanimous consent on that and send that to the President for signature, and that would extend this current PPP program until August 9th. We'll talk about what that would mean. And then also what's being discussed is just lender fatigue, as we saw a lot of lenders shut down their applications earlier than the June 30th date, and there's a little bit of fatigue on what the lending community needs to do to support this next round of business relief activities. So as we look at what else is going on with the policymakers, I talked about the status of the PPP extension. Mark's going to be talking about that in a little bit more detail in a second. PPP Phase 2, that definitely looks like it's going to happen. It looks like it will happen. It's something that's going to happen towards the end of July or early August, and it's going to be a program that will most likely have much greater restrictions or criteria on who is eligible. So there'll be such things as revenue decline, eligibility requirements. So it will be more difficult to qualify, but you will be able to get another PPP loan if you do qualify. And once again, those are discussions occurring, so it's not a definite, but it seems like there's a lot of bipartisan support. Phase 4 business relief, big question there is just the size of the original CARES Act, but that's also something that would still occur towards the end of July, early August. Ongoing discussions around the PPP transparency. Right now, in the House discussions related to the PPP extension, they're talking about saying they could support that, but some of the Congress representatives want full transparency for all of the loans as a requirement. Continuing questions around grants to not-for-profit PPP recipients. And then, Mark, I'm going to let you kind of just give an update related to the July 15th tax filing deadline and what happened there.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a little bit of history now more than things that are going to be going forward. But this week, IRS and Treasury came out and said that they are going to hold to the July 15th deadline. We had a great blog post from Ed Carl from our tax team in D.C. That we sent out earlier this week. That'll be included in your attachments here. We do want to talk about this more. Part of why we have Bill and Jeff, and both have been great volunteers to the profession over time on how difficult these types of decisions are for us to make, for the members to make. But, July 15th, and based on talking to a lot of different members, there are definitely both sides are very passionate about whether or not it should have stayed, whether or not it should have been extended to October 15th. So we'll have a bigger conversation on that in a little bit.
Thanks, Mark. So let's just dig a little bit deeper into the PPP extension. As we said, this is not a definite yet, but if it does occur, Mark, what is this going to mean to the forgiveness applications and process?
So, it's interesting that as we look at this, and I think you even hinted at this, Eric, as you were talking earlier about that Phase 2 bill. I think part of the thinking behind this in Congress is to still provide some level of small business cover until that gets done. There's anticipation that if there were a Phase 2 bill, it would come out towards the end of July. And this way, by extending this program, there is some level of small business coverage that continues as we go forward. The reality is we talk to a lot of firms is there's just not a lot of firms, small businesses that are looking for it. It's become a little saturated. And even the expectations of Treasury are a little surprised based on, they had a loan amount that they expected to see in the marketplace, and we've already hit that. But as you do this, like any good change to policy inside of programs like this also means additional delays to filing the forgiveness application, because now all of the documents that are done are based on this 8 or 24 week and the 24 weeks based on June 30th would have expired before December 31. Now this 5-week extension would push it out, and the coverage period could go beyond the December 31 safe harbor. And what is that going to mean to all the definitions and the documents and the like? So if you're filling out applications right now, I'd say wait. I'm sure you're not, though, because everybody's dealing with July 15th tax deadlines. But even still, this means that there's going to be additional time. So when you're talking to your clients, tell them this 5-week also means that those who are already in process are probably going to get delayed in getting their forgiveness application done. Eric?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So now let's just get into some of the new guidance. And I guess we didn't have any new FIRs last week, but we had a couple of new FAQs, so I'll move right to that.
We did, and I'm going to go real quick on these because there's nothing of great relevance. The first one about the loan maturity. The big thing with this is really talking to the lender. Because you have the ability to extend beyond 5 years doesn't necessarily mean that the lender will abide by that. And it is going to depend on what the loan document says. So having conversations between the borrower, the CPA, and the lender is going to be really important. Updates on loan calculations, calculating the maximum loan amounts by business types. This is primarily for the self-employed, and give some cover on what to do if you were not in operation in 2019 at that same time. If we go on to the next one.
And we got a photo for you, Mark. Got a picture for you.
Nice. This one, yes, it doesn't apply probably to our desert communities like Arizona, but firms like Bill Paroli's definitely, where they have a big concentration on fishing entities, this was important to get that, and Bill's firm may actually now get busier if this 5-week extension goes through, now that there's greater clarity around what's included in payroll costs for boat owners. But we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. If we go on to the next, I think we can really turn it over to Lisa and just do a quick refresher on where we are on loan forgiveness and hopefully answer some of the questions that already come in. Lisa?
Thanks, Mark. I thought we would start kind of the technical component of today just by going back through some of the information we've talked about in the last few weeks. And based on some of the questions that we've gotten through the Q&A for the last couple of weeks, a quick tip on the Q&A, we cannot keep track. If you've submitted a question and then come back and ask another question, we don't have the first part of that string. So please make sure your questions are as detailed as you can make them to give the mighty team behind the Q&A function the information they need to answer. Another quick tip, the FAQs that we referenced in that first, early in the slide, that's an actual resource that should be part of your materials as an attendee. So a separate handout from the slides that you should be able to download. If you are having trouble accessing that resource in the materials for today, you can also find a link to it at AICPA.org/SBA. It won't have the question numbers on it, but you'll still be able to find the answers that you're looking for there. All right, so let's get started with a quick refresher. Because of the PPP Flexibility Act, borrowers who received their SBA loan number prior to June 5th get the option of choosing either an 8-week or 24-week covered period. One of the questions we get frequently is how does the borrower indicate that they're going to choose 8 or 24? They actually do that simply on the face of the forgiveness application by entering the dates of the covered period that they're choosing. They do not need to notify the lender in advance according to the instructions to the forgiveness application. If your loan was received June 5th or later, if it was assigned an SBA loan number June 5th or later, then the covered period is 24 weeks. We also get a lot of questions about the timeline for applying for forgiveness and whether or not borrowers have a deadline for applying for forgiveness. And there's no clear, hard deadline currently for when they must apply for forgiveness, But if a borrower does not apply within 10 months after the last day of the covered period, then payments will need to begin, including principal and interest on the loan. Once they submit a loan forgiveness application, then the lender has 60 days to review the application for forgiveness, make their decision, and then submit it over to the SBA. We frequently get questions about whether or not a borrower can apply for forgiveness early. So let's say that they've chosen a 24-week covered period, or that's the option that's available to them, and they want to apply in October. It's our understanding that as long as the borrower has used their PPP funds, then they can go ahead and apply for forgiveness. So the catch there is your covered period is still either 24 weeks or 8 weeks. You don't get a covered period of 10 weeks or 12 weeks or 16 weeks. It's either 8 or 24. Next slide. So we just said you can apply for forgiveness before the end of the covered period, and the application or the interim final that came out recently walks through the process of applying the safe harbor if you have a salary and hourly wage reduction. So here's the IFR language. Basically, you're going to calculate any wage reduction and then apply that to the entire covered period. So you're foregoing the December 31 safe harbor to restore any decrease in salary or hourly wage. And again, if you apply for forgiveness early, you're still going to spread that reduction over the full covered period. So what does that really mean? We'll take a look in the next slide. Sorry, I'm having to hit F5, which is a handy trick if you can't see the screen moving. So applying the salary and hourly wage reduction, let's say that you had an employee who was making $1,000 a week, and then you cut their compensation from $1,000 to $700. Their pay rate went down $300 a week, which is 30%. The first 25% doesn't factor into the forgiveness calculation, but that extra 50 does. If you've got a borrower who took a 24-week covered period, then they would take that $50 a week times 24 weeks, and their forgiveness would be reduced by $1,200. And then you'll see the same if they chose an 8-week covered period. So that's how the calculation actually works. Next slide. There is another safe harbor, which is around whether or not the borrower reduced any FTEs. And so one of the questions is, how does that work if you're applying for forgiveness before the end of the covered period or December 31? We're actually we're awaiting some guidance on how that'll play out within the forgiveness application process. However, a couple weeks ago, I think we talked about this. It's our understanding that one of the safe harbors around a business being impacted by COVID-19 operating restrictions is going to apply to most borrowers. So it may be that they're given the opportunity to simply say, I meet that safe harbor, so the FTE reduction doesn't really apply to me. So we'll dig into that just a little bit more. So FTE reductions, these are some positives for the borrowers. I just wanted to summarize the different types of exceptions and safe harbors that you have. So the first one is the reduction exception, and these are on a position-by-position basis to reduce your FTE reduction penalty. So you'll see the requirements for taking those exceptions, again, position by position, and there are documentation requirements around there that you'll find included in the loan forgiveness application. So you offered to rehire an individual and they rejected it, and you can't find a similarly qualified person. You had reduced someone's hours and then you offered to restore them, and they either they reject the offer. So let's just say they can't come back to work. If you fired someone for cause, if they voluntarily resigned or asked for a reduction in hours, those again are position by position exceptions that you can take when you're calculating any FTE reduction penalty. These are the safe harbors, and so I'm kind of using an analogy. The first exceptions for like itemized deductions, and then these safe harbors are more like tax credits. They get you a much bigger bang for the buck. You are exempt from any loan forgiveness reduction, even if you've reduced your FTEs, if one of these two safe harbors is available to you. The first one is the operating restriction one that we just discussed. If the borrower is unable to operate at the same level of activity as before February 15, and it's because of a COVID-related restriction brought by the HHS, CDC, OSHA, or a local requirement, then the business hasn't been impacted and can take that safe harbor. There are, it seems to be a fairly generous interpretation that is anticipated under this safe harbor, so we've asked for some additional examples so that borrowers have some good faith that they'll be able to leverage that reduction safe harbor. The other one is if you've restored your FTE employee levels, and either by December 31 or the end of your covered period. So again, if you're applying early, we're just not quite sure how that would work. Next slide. So the ISR gives a great example of how that operating restriction safe harbor would actually operate. And I'll let you read through that, but basically at the end of the day, what's required is that the borrower maintains records regarding the fact that there was a reduction in business activity and that a government restriction referencing a COVID requirement or guidance impacted their operation. So again, you got to maintain some documentation around that, but that's going to be a very advantageous safe harbor for a good chunk of PPP borrowers. Next slide. All right, so this one generates a lot of Q&A and feedback. So the question is around what are the cash and non-cash compensation limits based on the covered period that the borrower chooses. For non-owner employees, if it's an 8-week borrower, it's $15,000 3 to 5. If it's a 24-week borrower, $46,000 is eligible on a per employee basis if they're a non-owner. For owner employees, you'll see the limits there, $15,385 and $20,833. There are differing opinions on the treatment of non-cash compensation for owners that you'll see in the other table. And so I'm giving you my interpretation. And I think it's pretty clear that for self-employed and general partners, health insurance and retirement are not included in eligible forgiveness costs. For S-Corp owner and employees, health insurance is not added in as a non-cash compensation figure in the calculation of forgivable payroll costs. However, S-Corp owner employees are theoretically supposed to have their health insurance included in their compensation, which was used in determining the loan amount and what is eligible for forgiveness in 2020. So got that little asterisk there. My interpretation of the interim final rule is that the cap on compensation includes retirement costs for S-Corp owner employees, and also same for C-Corp health insurance and retirement benefits. We have asked for additional guidance through an FAQ, so hopefully that will help clarify any confusion there.
So, Lisa, a lot of this is going to be coming out with the FAQs that come out, and for the July 9th town hall, we'll be able to kind of give more certainty on some of those things that we've given directional input on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We hit this a couple of weeks ago right after the new forms were released, but I just wanted to make sure that if you are a first-time listener, then you've got access to some of the highlights that we've identified around the new EZ application and the revised full application. So you've got the highlights there. You'll find links to these either on the AICPA.org/SBA site or on the SBA site itself. Next slide. Our loan forgiveness calculator is up and has been updated to allow borrowers to input whether or not they're going to use an 8-week or a 24-week covered period. So it is available for your use. We also have a simplified version if you are a borrower with no employees. Then we'll help you cut through some of those tabs on the full calculator, and you can move straight over to the simple version. My standard reminders are there, and please make sure that you read all the notes and enter all the data in the blue input cells just to make sure that the calculator gives you the right answers, because you've got to enter all the data to have it do all of its calculations. Next page.
Well, Lisa, I'll just say thank you. I mean, the special edition here in some ways is about all these summary slides that you and your team put together, which I think are very, very helpful. And I saw a lot of the questions, actually some of the online questions that were coming in, even referring them to some of these slides to get further clarification. So anything else that you would like to add before we move on to the next section here?
I think I'm good. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lisa. So you just saw the AICPA forgiveness calculator. We talked last week about the development of integrated PPP forgiveness tools. What we can tell you is that is happening. You will be seeing in the middle of July, if not sooner, but around middle of July, and no banks are even taking, forgiveness applications until, mid-July onward. But you're going to be, and we're working on one where you will have a online tool that helps you fill out the 3058 or 3058 EZ form, integrates potentially with a number of different payroll companies to upload a payroll compliance report. Also, if you don't have a payroll compliance report, allows you to do some of the steps and entering of information that you can do via the AICPA payroll forgiveness calculator, allows you to then enter additional non-payroll data, allows you to upload some source documents related to that non-payroll data, and then enables this information can be inputted by the firm or by the borrower, and then to have also the ability to have these forms electronically signed in the appropriate spots by the borrower, and then this whole file downloaded. So it'd be one master PDF with filled out 3058, the corresponding source documents, and this is something that we think could be used as a check and balance with what's going to be going on with the lender community. A lot of the lender community will absolutely have applications on their sites for doing the forgiveness process, but we know some firms and some borrowers may want to also just verify that they are getting the right amount of forgiveness, and that's something that we're thinking about. But more to come. I think there'll be a lot more on this on our July 9th town hall, and then the town hall the following week. So with that, Mark, we're kind of right on time here, which is good for this practitioner discussion, which I'm really looking forward to, because I think we're going to get some good insights, both related to the tax deadline that a lot of firms are thinking about, as well as to how both Bill Paroli and Jeff Porter have been managing the overall PPP process. So I'll hand this over to you to kick off some of these questions.
Thanks, and Jeff and Bill, thanks for joining us today. And as Eric had introduced, Bill and Jeff have really been just strong volunteers for the profession. and still maintain the practice of their own. Jeff has a small firm in West Virginia. Bill is with a mid-sized firm in Rhode Island, but grew up in the small firm environment before he merged that firm in. And both have been incredible advocates for the small firm. And so, we wanted to have this discussion because there has been feedback based on, some of the information that we put out from the Tax Executive Committee around July 15th. And we've had many a member who have emailed us on that topic, for or against. And it was a pretty split decision, really. And so I wanted to get perspective. Bill, we'll start with you on July 15th and kind of where your firm stood on whether or not July 15th should be extended beyond that.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. We started about a month ago contemplating how we would end tax season. And because there was some rumor back then that this may be extended one more time, and we needed to know as a firm what we were going to do, and everybody needed to be in the same position. So we had decided early on that regardless of whether or not we get another extension, that we would treat July 15 and we would go forward assuming that July 15 was our deadline. And in doing so, we were able to properly, keep our staff busy and stay focused on an end goal. And I think everybody that's been in this practice for a while knows that being deadline driven means you get very efficient around the deadline. And to have deadlines keep moving, for us, we just didn't feel that would keep that efficiency going on. So we decided early that July 15th would work for us, and we've been pushing for that. And I'm sitting here for the next 2 weeks just trying to get as many tax returns out the door as we can. And we also felt that our staff needed some closure. And again, we're in a larger firm with about 85 people, but as Mark said, I grew up for almost 30 years in a 6-person firm, and I could tell you with certainty that we would have made this same decision in our small firm. We needed closure. Our staff needed to know when it was going to start and when it was going to end. And from a firm management standpoint, we needed to get our arms around what the second half of our year would look like in terms of staffing and revenue and cash flow and things of that nature. We fully realize that we're in a different position being in New England. We're entering into phase 3. We got shut down early, and we're now opening up, and other parts of the country are going in the other direction. So that I'm sure that's bringing some challenges to many firms in Arizona and California and some of the hot spots. But that's how we looked at it, and that's how we're treating it. We want July 15th to be our end of tax season.
Bill, one of the things that we talked about, or in the decision-making process, we'll get to Jeff about, he's been involved in these decisions, which are never easy. We talked about state conformity. And a lot of people are like, well, are you representing the states? Or are you representing the CPAs? And it wasn't really about state revenue. It was the impact of if states weren't going to conform to another extension, that you still had to get the state returns done. I mean, what does your mix look like of multi-state filings that you have with your client base?
Yeah, we have a tremendous amount of multi-state filings. Number one, because of our size in Rhode Island and the proximity of our borders to our other New England states. It's a very, very common thing for us to file in a minimum of 3 states, but we also have clients that file literally in every state. And we realize that that's probably unique to a larger firm, but even as a smaller firm, we had clients that would file in 6, 7, 8, 10 states. And we just felt that there was no way we would get state conformity, and to be having to deal with state extensions without dealing with federal extensions or filing state returns without federal returns just made no sense from an operational standpoint. You would just be picking up that file and putting it down multiple times. So that's why we sort of made the decision that July 15th would work best for us, given our exposure to multiple states.
And Jeff, you are a small firm, but you've been around this process for a long time, and we appreciate your support and everything you've done for the profession. Just talk about that a little bit, because you weren't on the Tax Executive Committee making this decision, but you've been through other decisions like this. How does the Tax Executive Committee get to that point, and what is the makeup? Is it, we're never going to please everybody, I guess. So talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, Mark. So I've had the opportunity to be active in the tax division for almost 30 years. And in that cycle, I've chaired committees, a number of committees. I've been on just members of committees, and then, I chaired the Tax Executive Committee. And I think it's important for everybody to understand that the effort that goes into balancing the representation on these committees. I mean, so, they vary in sizes from maybe 8, 9 up to maybe 15, 16. And, great effort goes into having large firms, small firms, medium-sized firms, G100, all of those kinds of groups covered. But then also it tries to, the makeup is tried to be geographically balanced so that, you get the middle of the country, you get the coast, you get, north and south and everything. We have typically an educator, at least one, maybe 2 educators, for their perspective. We have business and industry members on these committees also. Again, trying to bring together a group that is reflective of the membership of the AICPA. I mean, the AICPA is a highly diverse organization with many types of members from many parts of the U.S. and around the world, and so these committees are trying to be representative of it. And the Tax Executive Committee is really done, it's very formed in a very, very same way. So what happens is when you have controversial issues, so sometimes controversial issues may percolate up through the committees to the Tax Executive Committee. Sometimes, if it's really big, it just may land at the Tax Executive Committee, and they'll reach out to the appropriate committees and subject matter experts, within the division, for input into it. And it's no surprise to anybody, I'm sure, that, there's a lot of strong opinions on just about any of these kinds of issues. And most people, most of the people are experienced volunteers, and they're not shy about expressing their opinions. So that's typically the process, and you do a lot of listening. Sometimes they'll do surveys. That's not that typical, but, on a big issue, they'll try to do sometimes survey to get feedback from a broader section, not just several hundred people that are committee members, but from just broader members of the tax division. And that's what they did that on the case in the issue of moving the July 15th date. And there's so many issues that need to be considered. And again, you got to take it from the perspective of, large firms, small firms, business and industry, et cetera. I mean, but client procrastination, as they talked about the state conformity issues, workload compression on firms, kind of what Bill was speaking about. There's just so many various and sundry issues. And again, a lot of times there's strong differences of opinions on the Tax Executive Committee. But at the end of the day, they make a decision, and the group, decides the course of action and then moves forward. And I believe one of the things they said, I had reached out and expressed my opinion, and I was given the assurance that the Tax Executive Committee was on it, but I was also given the assurance that the Tax Executive Committee, would be monitoring and watching, and, if there was adjustments that needed to be made or, additional outreach to Treasury or the IRS, that they would be doing that.
That's great. And I do think that, constant feedback. So members are always welcome to provide that feedback to the Tax Executive Committee as well. So appreciate that. Now, the big news of today is about this extension, or whether or not this extension goes through. So we could have another 5 weeks. What is your take, Jeff, with your clients? So did you have a lot of clients leading up to June 30th trying to get in? And do you anticipate more clients coming to you in the next 5 weeks?
I don't believe we're going to have any clients. I would suspect we will have no clients applying within the next 5 weeks. I mean, we had a lot of our clients, did in the very beginning, and they got in the first round and the second round. In the last 3 weeks, I know of one client that applied. So I think our client base has pretty much, they applied, they got through the process. And while I support it, I think extending it for another 5 weeks is a great idea. I don't think in our case it's going to have a lot of impact on our clientele. And I think that's partly because we're in West Virginia and our infection rate is low. We don't seem to be having a resurgence coming back again. So I don't think people, at least at this point, if they haven't applied, are going to be, seeing their businesses shut down. So I think in our case it's going to have a minimal impact.
And Bill, are you hearing anything?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jeff, because our part of the country, again, we're entering phase 3, and our economy has been partially open for a bit. We haven't seen much application activity in the last month. It seems to have, pretty much died out. We had a few that were maybe more seasonal and now have the opportunity with 24 weeks to be able to spend the money where they knew they couldn't spend it in 8. So some people have taken advantage of that. And as I said, we expect a big uptick in our commercial fishing business sector now that that's all been worked out. But no, we really don't anticipate a big push or a big surge in our firm.
Great. And to that, Bill, how about the forgiveness application? How are you guys managing, and is that the big topic now, or you mentioned July 15th as we're trying to get done with that? How is the makeup between trying to manage forgiveness applications and the July 15th deadline happening right now?
Well, it's interesting, Mark. I'm looking at the question board, and we're up to 122 questions by some people that I would consider to be some of the smartest people on the planet, and you can just see the confusion as it relates to forgiveness. And I think our clients have gotten patient with us telling them we don't know, and we've basically told them all, spend the money, keep track of it, put it in a separate account, use our data collection tool to keep track of how you're spending the money, spend it in accordance with the spirit of the law. And once everybody decides that the changes are done and all the questions are answered, then we'll get a forgiveness application or a forgiveness template out to you. But to push one out now just didn't make a lot of sense. And the other thing I wanted, cycling back to July 15th, Mark, one of the big pushes for us for July 15th, it wasn't driven top down. Our staff wanted July 15th, but also our clients wanted July 15th. They feel like they're out of sync. They're used to doing, an April estimate, a June estimate, and they want it over. And even some of my biggest procrastinators have brought their work in early and say, I want this to be over because I'm totally confused and I need to get on running my business and I want to put my personal return behind me. So we think that the forgiveness process is going to flatten as well, with people being able to, choose an interim period between the 8-week and the 24-week, or maybe it's 10 weeks, but it's going to be a lot of work. We're tracking 220 loans that our clients took through our firm, or they did on their own, and we're trying to manage all those due dates. So it's going to be a busy fall working with our clients to get that done.
And Jeff, how about for you? How's the forgiveness application process, and how are you managing that with July 15th?
One of our key efforts in the very beginning of all of this was to communicate with our clients and to educate them. And so one of the things that we tried to do is each time a new IFR comes out or the frequently asked questions are updated, we're pushing out, try to push out the very next day, an email, not that just attaches the rules, but an email that kind of tries to interpret those rules and what they're telling us. So we believe that the more we can educate our clients about this process, the smoother the forgiveness process will go for them. And as I think Eric said earlier, that many banks aren't going to be doing, even accepting applications until mid-July, maybe later. We feel like that once we get past July 15th, we've got our returns done. We've got the returns done up to that point, I should say. We'll begin reaching out to clients and working through the process with them, talking to them about, the information they need, what kind of questions do they have, discussing what period they want to use, what may work out better for them, the 8-week, the 24-week, or something in between. And working with we're going to be doing training with our staff on the AICPA calculator. If clients want to use it, we'll be working with the clients on using the AICPA calculator. So, we're trying to focus our way around, after we get past July 15th to really kind of pivot to these forgiveness applications, at least for a short period of time, and get everybody educated.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Jeff. And just as a highlight, we are getting feedback that the 5-week extension does not look like it'll pass the House today. There may be some miracle by the end of the day, but right now things are not looking good for that, so don't anticipate that. Today may be the last day of session. We'll see if they do an extra day or not, but that currently isn't looking good, but we'll see where it goes. Eric, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I want to thank Jeff and Bill for joining us, and as always for your leadership in the profession. And based on the thank yous and the number of emails from our very kind members, over 2,500, I think we're close to 3,000 today. On a light day, we typically get 4,000. We just thank you all for hanging in there with us. I'm going to turn it back over to Eric, though, to move us along. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks, Bill and Jeff. And one thing I'll just say is, well, we've been very active over the past 13 weeks, and we've probably spoken to more members and more firms than ever before during such a compressed time. And we like to get both sides of the equation. Get the views that are contrary to maybe some of our thinking, that helps our thinking. And many times we've done some follow-up. I know Mark Koziel's done some follow-up, and we welcome the diversity of opinions, and there's always some gray and judgment that needs to be done around these different matters. And when we look at what's happened here with the business relief programs and where we're going, there is a lot of uncertainty, and there's going to continue to be uncertainty. With that said, with time, there will be more clarity. And I saw some of the questions that were coming in. There were questions like, will I be able to know for certain my client's forgiveness before they do the filing for the 2020 tax season? And I think the answer to that is clearly yes. In the coming weeks, you're going to have more sophisticated, forgiveness tools. You're going to have the final guidance coming out related to the PPP program from Treasury. That will all get digested. Then you'll have to work your covered period. And I think there'll be a lot of certainty this fall between the firms and their clients on what will be forgivable. And clearly, what we're feeling with Treasury and the SBA is most of the forgiveness applications will be done in the fall. And some even in the fourth quarter, and there might be a few that go into 2021. But here's the broader business relief options that we've been talking about over the past couple of months. And just a couple of comments here. On the Main Street Lending Program, there's now 200 banks that have enrolled, but there's still, from our understanding, there has not been any loans distributed via the Main Street Lending Program. There's efforts being put there. There is a desire to get liquidity into the Main Street program for those businesses. And there's also discussions now in Congress about a program that would be for businesses that need slightly less than the amounts outlined here. So there's just continued interest to produce liquidity for these small businesses or these businesses that have been impacted. So Lisa, let's just grab a couple of questions here from the audience and discuss them.
Okay. First of all, we're getting a lot of questions about IDLEs in Main Street lending options. There is a new resource available on our AICPA.org SBA site, and I've also put a link to it in the question near the front of the presentation about what can you use an IDLE for and those kinds of things. So check out that new resource to see if that answers some of those questions. Eric, we got a couple of questions about the loan forgiveness tool, the holistic tool that we're working on. And we know that bankers are going to be developing their own tools. Can you talk a little bit briefly about how we're going about working with lenders to integrate into their process?
Yes. I mean, what you're going to see in the marketplace is the lenders are the ones that took the initial application, and they're going to be the ones submitting the forgiveness application. So one rule we've always said, you need to work with your lender. There was a question here today about a fishing boat business that wanted to amend their application due to these new rules. What you need to do is you need to speak to the lender. So just regarding our tools and what the lenders will be putting in place, we want to work on a common approach. We want to try to help the marketplace have a common document set. There's over 5,000 lenders. So working with some of the banking leadership, we want to, and the payroll companies and the Treasury and SBA, say this is the document set that we think is required, and try to get a common agreement on that. And then we do want to take our AICPA forgiveness calculator the next step, where you could follow the processes in the calculator and actually at the same time fill out the 3058 application and attach the source documents. A tool like that will be available to lenders. Some lenders may decide to take advantage of it. Clearly, the national banks are going to have their own proprietary systems. So what I would just say is wait to see what evolves. We are going to try to play a leadership role here and build some type of open source tool, and just continue our discussion with the lenders and the payroll providers. We think that the ADPs and Paychecks and Intuits are going to come out with integrated tools. So there'll be a lot of integrated tools, and that's important to help drive a simple process for the borrowers. So that's all we can say right now, Lisa. I think we just need to wait to see how this all evolves over the next couple of weeks, and we will be talking about this in greater detail in mid-July.
Thanks, Eric. Another thing that we'll talk about in greater detail, we've gotten lots of questions about not-for-profit borrowers and how some of the issues that might be coming up with grants. We're not going to have time to go into that today, but we'll definitely make sure that we get that included in next week's town hall conversation. So we'll dig into that topic a little bit more.
I would say, Lisa, just as a general rule, no double dipping. I mean, that's what we're hearing from. Yeah. That seems to be the sentiment, for a quick answer.
Love Mark's quick answer.
Resource section, Lisa, unless you've got one last item you want to raise here.
No, I think we're good. Thank you.
So let's just highlight the resources. Here's the resource page. We will continue to update this. There's a good chance these FAQs are going to come out. I think you can wait for us to digest them and give you our readouts early next week. We know there's a lot of work that needs to be done related to the tax deadline, but we will, both on our social media accounts and on that resource page, keep you current. Here's a slide on the PPP accounting for lenders, which we've spoken about in previous town halls. We also have a broader tax resource center, and here's some additional learning opportunities for your reference. And then finally, we all are working, real hard. It's been an incredibly intense period. Here's some tools just to try to help you step back and, think about your wellness. So just finally, we will be having our next town hall on Thursday at 3 p.m. next week, back to the regular time. On that town hall, we're going to have a special guest, CPA business consultant Gene Marks. He's going to talk about lessons learned over the past 100 days, and we absolutely will be covering these FAQs, and I think we can almost be certain that those FAQs will come out by then, and we will have digested them and have some summary slides here. So I just want to thank again Bill Paroli, our vice chair, and Jeff Porter, a former tax chair, for their comments, and Mark and Lisa just for your continued support and leadership here, and all of you listening in today. We really value your time. We take these questions back and we leverage them for our resource center. So we hope everybody has a safe and good 4th of July, and we look forward to being with you next week. Thank you very much.